If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with the long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad, who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite, you made flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a tale. The author of these words was murdered by the Zionist occupation force yesterday. We all woke up to this sad news. Refaat Alareer, an English teacher and professor, was murdered in an Israeli bombing today. He was a frequent collaborator with Electronic Intifada, who expresses their shock, anger, and deep sadness at the murder by Israeli occupation forces of their friend and colleague Dr. Refaat Alareer in an airstrike in Gaza City on December 6th. Refaat was killed along with his brother, sister, and four of her children when his sister's home was attacked. Okay, this was not a random attack, by the way. The Zionist occupation force is in the process of trying to eradicate all of Palestine's intelligentsia. They raided and destroyed archives, stomping over books. Like, these documents are older than the state of Israel. So they're trying to wipe out an entire people's national history and consciousness. People like Dr. Alareer hold the collective consciousness and write the collective consciousness of their people and spread it to the world. They express their deep condolences to Rafat's wife, Nuseba, and their children and other surviving family members, to all his students and former students of whom he was so proud, and to everyone who loved him. Rifat and his family had already been displaced within Gaza several times after his home was bombed in October. And this was written by him on October 20th, 2023. Israel hit our building of 7 floors and 21 flats with 2 missiles penetrating floors 5 and 4, where they exploded, killing a mother who was preparing food for her kids and 2 of her daughters. He had 30 civilians in his 3rd floor. Look at this. Like, these are innocent fucking people, innocent fucking families, family homes, murdering people while they're cooking food for their kids. He was a proud son of Gaza City's Shujaya district. He was a professor of English literature at the Islamic University of Gaza, and he was a co founder of We Are Not Numbers, a project launched in Gaza after Israel's 2014 attack to mentor and support young writers in the besieged territory and help them tell their stories to the world. So you're looking at Dr. Alareer's legacy right here. We Are Not Numbers. And there are many stories that are written up here. This is from Wala Al Fara. This was released today. And she tells us that the moment the 7-day truce ended December 1st, the U.S. backed Israeli airstrikes became continuous. Many buildings around our house in Khan Yunis were targeted. Whoever was inside was a target. From my location far away in the United Kingdom, I knew that Gaza lacked safe spaces, but I had deceived myself into believing that since my brothers lived in the southern part, at least they would be safe. I held on to this notion despite the many times that they'd sent me videos and photos of bombing and shelling. It broke my heart reaching out to them a few days ago when all they could say was, "We don't know where to go. We don't know what to do. We have no idea whether to stay or to leave. If we leave, where to?" We were able to talk only once more after they were forced to evacuate our house via a video call on the unstable pay as you go internet access from the street. They only had a few blankets with them, some water, and a little canned food. One brother had left on a bicycle. He couldn't find a car or any other transportation to take him anywhere. The other had to sit in the open trunk of a car that belonged to other people, none of whom knew where they were heading. All anyone knew was that they wanted to save their lives. I perceived the sorrow in their eyes, acknowledging that, even though I am stranded in the UK, At least I experience a semblance of a regular life. Their expressions weigh heavily on me. I yearn for them to understand that given the opportunity, I would swiftly exchange places with them, ensuring their safety. It pains me to witness their fear while I'm at such a distance, unable to be by their side, to see them, to touch them. I long for the opportunity to express my deep love and care for them, conveying the profound sadness within me as they endure this genocide without me. As I write this on my phone, I received the news that the mosque, a mere minute from our home, has fallen victim to bombings. Uncertainty looms over our residence, and I'm unsure if our house has suffered the same fate. My brothers have departed to whereabouts unknown. I'm unable to reach them, but I convince myself that it is only because they do not have internet connection. Once they do, I tell myself, I'll find them alive and healthy. I'm trying to stay sane in the midst of madness, and it's not working. My earnest prayers are devoted solely to their safety and well being. As a descendant of people who did not know whether or not their people would be ripped away from them by cruel and heartless slave traders and slave owners, I can relate deeply to this. Breaking up a family is a horrible. It's probably one of the most cruel things that you can do. Humans are social and family oriented animals. We are not like meant to be alone. Like there are people in Gaza and the West Bank who are literally the only remaining members of their family. Can you imagine how lonely a fucking existence that is? But rest in power to Dr. Refaat Alareer, and I strongly encourage you to read We Are Not Numbers and the many stories contained therein, and also order his book. Let me get the title for you. I ordered it earlier, but the best way that we could pay tribute to the memory of Dr. Alareer and the other martyrs of this cruel and horrible occupation and genocide. That's literally all that we can call it, a literal genocide taking place before our eyes, is to continue to fight, continue to spread these narratives to counter the Zionist Hasbara bullshit that's being spread, and continue to talk to our families, talk to our coworkers, educate our people so that this does not continue to happen. And eventually, the Palestinian people will be free in their homeland, and the state of Israel will be simply another cruel memory, very much akin to apartheid South Africa and Rhodesia and colonial Kenya and all these other places where the masses of people saw nothing but death. The title of Dr. Alareer's book is Gaza Writes Back, Short Stories from Young Writers in Gaza, Palestine. Um, so yeah, pay tribute to this very remarkable man, very remarkable freedom fighter, and the tens of thousands of other martyrs of this horrible and cruel war. Well, it's not even a war. This is a massacre. That's what this is. Um, Somebody put this in the chat. We did what we could. Remember us. These are the words Dr. Mahmoud Abu Nujayla wrote on a Gaza hospital whiteboard normally used for planning surgeries at the end of October 2023. And like, don't let yourself become numb to this, okay? Like every time you see something like this, like I saw a dude's arm being pulled out of rubble yesterday. Like, do not let yourself become numb to this bullshit. This is not. I mean, yeah, this is normal day for a colonial occupation, but like, this is not how human beings are intended to live. This is not what human beings are intended to do to each other. This is a colonial occupation. This is a settler colonial act of butchery. And people are constantly asking, like, why don't you condemn this? Why don't you condemn that? Like, why don't you condemn the people who started this shit like decades ago and have not given the Palestinian people any reprieve or any rest for almost 100 years? The sole blame rests with the Israeli government. The Palestinian people cannot be blamed for any act, violent or otherwise, that they take to ensure their people's continued survival. I'm sorry. So while we are speaking of resistance. A ridiculous narrative that needs to be combated and stricken from our collective brain is that indigenous people and black people in the Americas simply sat back and watched as our people were driven to either extinction or to new and cruel forms of slavery. This was not the case at all. We fought back at every avenue whenever the opportunity was presented to itself. We had small forms of resistance, such as grinding up glass and putting it in our slaves' masters' food, poisons, taking an axe and lopping off his head. Those are small acts of resistance. So we also had massive collective forms of resistance. So the indigenous people of these continents were actually masters and pioneers in the art of guerrilla war. Guerrilla war is the war of the oppressed. Okay, oppressed people do not fight with jets and tanks and stuff like that. That's how oppressors fight. Okay, of course, yes, many socialist countries have had fighter jets and tanks, but like when you are fighting for your freedom, when you're fighting for your liberation, you do not have access to all of these tools that the oppressors or states have access to because you're poor and you are limited to what you can find or what you can steal from the enemy. So, how did our indigenous comrades fight? How were they able to protect their cultures and protect their people and ensure that there are still indigenous people walking this continent today? Well, there's this, I guess, written up online research paper that talks about this. So you've got the culture of Native American small wars, guerrilla wars. Like guerrilla literally means little war, guerrilla. When Native American warriors encountered overwhelming odds, they were expected to run. Faced with no win conditions, commanders and soldiers covered their retreat. Warrior braves were legendary for retrieving their dead, much as modern professional soldiers do today. It was never a disgrace for indigenous warriors to retreat from a superior enemy's forces. European militaries considered the flight of indigenous warriors during battle to be unprofessional and cowardly. Native American warfare's doctrine of tactical retreat was intelligent and economical. So back in the day, like European armies fought like, okay, here's all your guys here, here's all their guys there. So shoulder your musket, then unshoulder it, put your bayonet on, rah, 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 rah. So you just plod towards each other and then you butcher each other. That's not how indigenous people fight. Because the environment and the like population density and like you're fighting in the woods, you can't just line up and march towards each other. And that's fucking stupid. That's fucking stupid. So whenever the Brits tried to fight like that against indigenous people, the indigenous people came out of the woods. Like they would isolate and separate their different units, different enemy units that they were fighting, and they would fuck them up one by one. That's how indigenous people fight. And in many cases, that was how the American colonists fought during the so-called Revolutionary War. So warfare conducted by Native American soldiers took into account military and human resources. Native guerrilla wars were carried out so that warriors were not unnecessarily killed in battle. Lines of retreat and quarter were given to adversaries so as to avoid long, drawn-out battles, which needlessly drained resources. Irregular warfare preserved the loss of tribal people. This, in turn, improved long-term survival of the community. First Nations warrior culture placed strong emphasis on preserving the family unit. Captured warriors were often integrated into tribes as replacements, skills were transferred, and bloodlines were improved. So, I'm currently reading this book. It's called We Were Not the Savages. It's about the Mi'kmaq indigenous people. They live mainly along the east coast of Canada and in the state of Maine in the United States. Like, if you were like a chief, like the concept of indigenous nations leadership was remarkably different from like the divine right of kings that the Europeans were so hopped up on. Like if you were a chief in the Mi'kmaq culture, it was because you were fearless. It was because you were widely respected in the community, and it was because you were self-sacrificing. So if you got your people into an unwinnable, stupid war of conquest, well, which wouldn't have happened in the first place because you were expected to consult your people, and like they would literally do this thing where they would like send Um, they would send different groups of people between tribes, and they would hold feasts to try to negotiate this thing before it flared up into a war. And like, if you got your people into a stupid war, like, you would be expected to duel the opposing chief, and one of you would be killed. So your ass was on the line. Like, you weren't just sitting in a palace or a castle somewhere, sending all these young dudes off to die. That was not happening. So, key concepts of Native American guerrilla warfare. La Petite Guerre, the Little War. Native American war parties specifically avoided symmetrical and conventional European warfare. Native American warrior tactics were based on small raiding parties, hunting parties, and ambuscades. Native American war parties used surprise and lightning fast strikes. Does this sound familiar to our Maoist tacticians here? Native small war strategy was based on a cultural theory that small raiding parties and asymmetrical warfare allowed warriors to survive conventional conflicts, allowing them to fight battles on their times later at a place and time of choosing. Mao would say that if I cannot win, then I'm going to run far away where you cannot catch me. If I can win, I'm going to surround you and I'm going to destroy you. The indigenous people of this continent would definitely shake their heads in agreement at that. The independent thinking of warriors and their autonomy in the battle space allowed them to maneuver rapidly and adapt quickly. Native chiefs and officers would impart the general goal of the war party to the warrior soldier, thus allowed them to freelance battle plans while working towards the objective. Native American soldiers displayed psychological warfare to intimidate their adversaries. And Native American irregular warfare tactics were so effective that European militaries, well, colonial militaries, had to adapt. The British and French militaries came to the realization that embedding Indian scouts and allied native war parties into their own apparatus increased their odds of winning in the wilderness battle space. The European armies would have to learn and use asymmetrical tactics and strategies to level the battlefield. Native American guerrilla warfare was considered ungentlemanly and crude, but if you're fighting a war, you really don't give a shit about being ungentlemanly and crude. You give a shit about winning. And you also have our brothers in Jamaica, who in many cases had integrated with or integrated indigenous communities into their own communities. You had several Maroon uprisings, and in many cases, these uprisings were successful, and the British had to literally make treaties with them. Like, the fact that the Brits made treaties with the Maroons directly inspired the Haitian Revolution, because, like, okay, if they could do it, why can't we? In the 1730s, the island contained an estimated 80,000 indigenous enslaved Africans and 8,000 whites, of whom only 1,000 were masters of families or men of any property. Most of the other whites, aside from the women and minors, were indentured servants, mostly Irish. So to fight the Maroons, you can't fight 80,000 people with 8,000 people. So the planters were forced to actually arm their slaves. They were forced to call upon their slaves and a small number of free blacks and mixed race people to come to their aid, despite the uneasiness it caused them to arm the blacks. The parties at the island raised against the Maroons not only failed to defeat them, they failed dismally. The sheer incompetence of battle was encouraging to both the Maroons and the plantation slaves, who were soon to become Maroons, alike. Frightened by their inability to contain the growing menace, the Colonial Assembly made desperate pleas to the Crown for trained troops. England sent soldiers to aid her prize colony of Jamaica, but they too proved of little use against the Maroons. Why? Disease. Fresh from Europe, the new troops were extremely vulnerable to the diseases of tropical Jamaica, including malaria and yellow fever. Local Creole whites, who had already survived a period of seasoning or acclimation to the climate and its diseases, fared better, as did the blacks, many of whom had an inherited resistance to malaria from Africa. But the new troops were dying like flies. One of their commanders, Colonel Cornwallis, wrote home, "One can't sit 24 hours without hearing of some of the corps being either sick or dead. They say everybody has a seasoning, and that seasoning has hitherto carried off everyone that has had it." Weakened by disease, the troops were further demoralized and confused by the type of fighting they faced. They saw in it no opportunity for military honor as they knew it. Because the Maroons used similar tactics to the indigenous people of the mainland. Hit and run tactics, hiding. There's this huge area of Jamaica. It's like a bunch of extremely inhospitable terrain, hills, gullies, ditches, canyons, rivers. Like, you cannot cross or use this territory with conventional military tactics. The Maroons were at home there. The Europeans were not. To console themselves, the troops, both officers and men, turned to drinking. You always, let's just go fight a war against guerrilla warriors while drunk. This further incapacitated them, for the drink was rum, the ruin of this island, Governor Hunter called it, and easier to come at here than in small beer in England. The Maroons had purposefully located their settlements in the most inaccessible areas of the island, and all movement had to be on foot over difficult and dangerous terrain. You can't use horses and mules here because you'll break their fucking legs. And getting into Maroon country was less than half the battle. It did not even ensure that one would meet up with the enemy. As Governor Trelawney tried to explain to those back in England in 1738, the service here is not like that in Flanders or any part of Europe. Here, the greatest difficulty is not to beat, but to see the enemy. These men are forced to march up the currents of rivers over steep mountains and precipices without a track, through such thick woods that they are obliged to cut their way almost every step, the underwoods always being full of saps and new shoots, exceedingly tough and bushy, twisted and entangled in a strange manner. Add to this that they frequently meet with torrents caused by heavy piercing rains that often fall in the woods, and against which tents or no self-shelter. In short, nothing can be done in strict conformity to the usual military preparations, and according to a regular manner, bushfighting, as they call it, being a thing peculiar to itself. So you're marching through this territory, mountains, hills, rivers, thick-ass jungle. You meet the enemy, you're going to be tired as fuck. And they're going to fix it so that you can't see them. Like, these were masters of camouflage. These were masters of using the terrain against you. Like, look at this picture here. Like, you don't know if there's 500 dudes hidden up here. The village of Cal, a headman of the Windward Maroons, was so situated that no body of men, or scarce an individual, could approach it, that they would not have 5 or 6 hours' notice by their out-sentinels. The only accessible way to it was up a very narrow path in which holes were cut from place to place, about 4 feet deep, all the way up and down, with crutch sticks set before them for the entrenched Negroes to rest their guns upon. These Maroons, hidden behind bushes, were invisible to their attackers. Another common defense was to secure huge stones with props or ties and set them rolling down on the approaching troops. And even if you captured that village, the most it usually accomplished was to occupy the Maroons for a few months while they settled in a new location. So you see unity of tactics between the indigenous people and the Maroons, especially in Jamaica. And there were Maroons in the United States as well. They lived in the Great Dismal Swamp of the Carolinas. And their method of fighting was very similar. So, yeah. That's how our ancestors fought back in the day. How did they fight in the 20th century? A lot of people think that the Tulsa Massacre, well, it was a massacre, was basically just black people going about their business. And just, oh, here come these evil white men, and they're going to shoot us from an airplane, and they're just riding through gun against that. No, we fought back. And we gave them hell. So you had a communist group, the African Blood Brotherhood, and the Tulsa Massacre, the Tulsa Race War, whatever you want to call it, started when this guy was he was accused of trying to sexually harass, aka rape, a white woman in an elevator. Of course, this was bullshit. They always said that. But they were intending to lynch this individual. I believe his name was Dick Rowland. The African Blood Brotherhood and masses of the community were not going to let this happen. So when Dick Rowland was arrested for an incident on a downtown elevator involving a white girl, many in Tulsa's black community immediately feared a lynching. A year before, a white man had been lynched in Jenks, and no one was prosecuted, even though deputies were present, as well as newspaper reporters who wrote about the event. If a white man could be lynched, the black newspapers asked, why couldn't a Negro get the same treatment? Then you had the white-owned Tulsa Tribune publishing inflammatory editorials, which led a crowd of angry whites to gather at the courthouse. In the Greenwood district, men gathered at the office of the Tulsa Star, the black newspaper, owned by an individual named A.J. Smitherman, who was an advocate of black militancy and armed self-defense. Just weeks earlier, he had brought W.B. Du Bois to Tulsa. So Greenwood's leaders, Greenwood was also known as Black Wall Street, sounds familiar, they had dispatched messengers to every corner of the Negro district, pulling out the call for men in arms, and volunteers arrived every minute, singly and in groups, carrying rifles, pistols, shotguns, garden hose, rakes, and axes. Young with old, rich and poor. So this was unity across classes, because when the settlers came to attack They weren't going to ask, are you rich? Are you poor? They were going to be shooting at anything with a black face. So they went to the courthouse. Several carloads of these men, armed with rifles, drove around the courthouse in downtown Tulsa. Then a group traveled on foot from Greenwood to the courthouse with the intention of stopping any lynching. Who were these men? Were elements of the African Blood Brotherhood among their number? This was a Marxist group, by the way. There is no real reason to doubt it. In the days after the riot, Cyril Briggs and the national ABB leadership claimed their involvement, and the Tulsa authorities immediately placed the blame upon them. So the sheriff used a racial slur towards one of these men and ordered him to surrender his pistol. This did not happen. The white man attempted to disarm the veteran, and a shot was fired. Sheriff McCullough stated from that moment that the race war was on and he was powerless to stop it. A prolonged gunfight broke out as the blacks withdrew towards Greenwood and Archer. If you're familiar with the Gap Band, they're a funk band from the 70s and 80s. They actually are from Tulsa, and Gap is not it's not referring to gap in your teeth or something like that. It's referring to Greenwood, Archer, and Pine, because that was the neighborhood they're from. They're from Black Wall Street. So they continued to fight into the wee hours of the morning. The black defenders held the train station as a fortress, and with the bodies of white attackers scattered through the streets, the blacks retreated into Greenwood. So guerrilla war was on in Tulsa. This overnight fighting is usually ignored or skimmed over in the stories of the Tulsa riot. Far from being helpless victims, Tulsa's black population fought with brutal efficiency against the white invaders. It is not hard to imagine this defense was pre-planned or at least theorized before the shots began firing. Regarding the helpless victim mythology, W.D. Williams has disputed this assumption, citing as evidence the large number of whites which he saw get shot by black snipers as they attempted to invade Deep Greenwood. The Oklahoma City Black Dispatch of June 10, 1921, reported that it had received a letter from a prominent Negro in the city of Tulsa who stated that from what he could learn on the ground, about 100 were killed, equally divided between the two races. So we gave as good as we got. So the only way that they could unask the black defenders of Greenwood was basically to, one, engage in an aerial attack, and two, just get everybody together and fucking storm. Especially in the attacks on the Negro church, which was held by a handful of ex-soldiers. The casualty list, losses suffered in battle, is a longer list than our own. Many score of them were sent on a long journey. A score is 20. So many score is, who knows. Mount Zion Baptist Church sat on a prominent hill with its belfry, aka bell tower, acting as a sniper's nest. A handful of ex-soldiers, the ABB claimed as their own, would have to hold a tactical high ground. A heavy machine gun was brought in at dawn to riddle the church until the defenders were forced to withdraw. They also said that there was ammunition being stored in the church. Apparently it exploded. The defense of Greenwood may be overlooked in the history books, but it has entered black folklore. The story is told how Peg Leg Taylor, another veteran of the First World War, spent the afternoon shoplifting ammunition from the downtown hardware stores. Armed with a .30-30 rifle and a shotgun, he had assumed tactical positions throughout the night, keeping the white combatants at bay while stores were looted for arms and ammunition by his comrades. This displays mastery of tactics. As dawn broke and a whistle sounded, a mass of white attackers charged across the tracks into Greenwood. While ABB snipers shot it out with the white mob around the church, Taylor held a defensive position on a hill 6 blocks from First Street on the north side. He shot round after round of bullets for 6 hours. He did so much damage that the whites figured the Negroes had reinforcements. The story of Taylor is still well known in North Tulsa and completely forgotten in the rest of the city. Cyril Briggs, one of the founders of the ABB, said of the Tulsa War, the Negro citizen warriors of Tulsa saved the legal machinery of that city from a breakdown, an all too frequent occurrence in Southern American cities. All honor to those Negroes. All honor to the new Negro who fights back. Better 1,000 race riots than a single lynching, says the African Blood Brotherhood. So the first Marxist communist group among black people in the United States was the direct result of the Tulsa Uprising and Red Summer of 1919, when there were race riots in Washington, D.C., Chicago, and various other cities in the United States. So every time one of these race riots happened, and a race riot could pop off for any fucking thing. Like there were riots after Jack Johnson won the world heavyweight title. Like you literally had white people just going into black neighborhoods trying to shoot people, and black people shooting back and killing them. And Vicky Osterweil's in defense of looting, who um, she, I believe, is an anarchist, but it's a very good book. So you should check it out. So Osterweil says that if the riot in Tulsa saw the tragic destruction of a symbol and community of black power, why did many black Tulsans who lived through it look back on it with pride? We'll find out. The legacy of the riot in Tulsa favors black power. During the 50s and 60s, black civil rights leaders used the threat of bringing up the riots as leverage in negotiations with white leaders. And the white papers in Tulsa never mentioned the riot thereafter, black papers spoke of it openly and often. For many black Tulsans, the riot, and particularly the rebuilding of their community, is an issue of pride. Because, like, as Osterweil says, most of the black residents and business owners rented their property. Some 2/3 of the real value destroyed in the riot belonged to white folks. So whenever we have an uprising in the modern day, they always talk about, why are you all burning down your own neighborhoods? Because in many cases, this property is white owned. But in this instance, you had a race riot where white people were burning down literally a neighborhood that they owned. This was white capital being harmed. Greenwood was only truly destroyed by a recent wave of gentrification. What other organization, the ABB says, could claim the brave record? And she goes on to talk about how, like, white people did not want to talk about this because they got their asses kicked. They were cowardly and they got their asses kicked. All accounts suggest that some significant number, a third to half of those killed in the case of the lower total estimates, were white rioters. Although the numbers and proportions will never be accurately known, many in Tulsa believe the true casualty numbers were covered up because they would have become a source of shame for the white community. So let's fast forward a little bit to the civil rights movement era. We're going to talk about Robert F. Williams, and we're also going to talk about a rarely covered instance where a group of Lumbee indigenous people, the Lumbee, they're what you call like triracial. They have Caucasian heritage. I think most anthropologists believe that they're descended from the English settlers who occupied the Roanoke colony, the lost colony or whatever. They didn't disappear. They weren't taken by ghosts. They didn't eat each other. They weren't eaten by the indigenous people. They wanted to go live with the local indigenous tribe. You had black people who were runaway slaves who integrated into this community, and you also had the existing indigenous population. So the Lumbee are triracial. They have everybody's blood in them, but they're a recognized indigenous tribe. So the Battle of Hayes Pond, what happened there?
In school, we learn about important battles in U.S. history. The Battle of Lexington, the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Normandy. But what about the Battle of Hayes Pond? It's not in your textbooks. There's only one small statue about it in the whole world. It was a battle in the centuries-long war over white supremacy, pitting armed, working-class Native people against the Ku Klux Klan. It took place in small Robeson County in North Carolina in 1958. The KKK, under Grand Dragon James Catfish Cole, was on a campaign of terror and killings across the state. They targeted black activists and quote-unquote troublemakers, as well as interracial couples. Many North Carolina cops were suspected KKK members themselves.
Suspected?
And so they did nothing about it. First, Robert F. Williams led an armed defense against Cole and the KKK in Monroe County. The Klan then targeted Lumbee people in Robeson County, calling them mongrels because of intermarriage. Burning crosses at the house of a Lumbee woman and a white man, they put out an ad for another rally 5 days later in the Lumbee town of Maxton. The Lumbee responded, "If the KKK can bring their weapons, why can't we?" Even the local sheriff advised Catfish Cole that his life would be in danger. On the night of the rally, only 50 racists showed up, and 500 Lumbee. The Lumbee encircled the Klan rally. They grabbed the
Old guerrilla war tactic.
Klan's amplifiers. That triggered the offensive. The Lumbee charged and opened fire. The racists were quickly overwhelmed and panicked. Cole and his crew ran away towards the swamp of Hayes Pond. The sheriff had 2 plainclothes cops in their demonstration who fired tear gas to protect the racists. The Lumbee group only dispersed after rounding up the Klan's weapons. The Klan fled the Robeson County that night and would not have a presence there for decades. Catfish Cole became a liability to the local ruling class. He was prosecuted and jailed for inciting a riot. It was the end of his career as a white supremacist leader.
Womp womp. And funny thing, like all these reactionary fascist groups, they always talk about the sanctity of white women. He left his wife in the car, surrounded by these so-called mongrels, and they actually had to escort her back to her husband. Dumbasses. You cannot talk about how we defended ourselves at the grassroots level without talking about Robert F. Williams and his wife Mabel, who we just saw. So this is the living room of a local doctor named Perry, who's active in NAACP organizing. This is his book. It's titled Negroes with Guns. I highly recommend reading it. Put it in the chat. They're also going to be in the YouTube description. So you had the racist sheriff who took sides with the Klan because the Klan would just ride by and shoot into this man's house. So Robert F. Williams formed a branch of the NAACP, well, reformed it on a militant basis. He was the only militant NAACP chapter in the country in Monroe, North Carolina. And he also formed a chapter of the NRA. So he says in his book that we started arming ourselves. I wrote to the National Rifle Association, which encourages veterans to keep shape in their native land, and applied to defend their native land, rather, and asked for a charter, which we got. In a year, we had 60 members. We had bought some guns, too, in stores, and later a church in the north raised money and got us better rifles. As someone in North Carolina, the Lumbees are still badass. They were the biggest group mobilizing alongside black folks to get this major Confederate monument taken down on UNC's campus. That's dope. Like the Klan would start these like motorcades to just ride through and irritate the community, shooting out windows and stuff like that. So he says that the Klan discovered that we were arming and guarding our community. In the summer of '57, they made one big attempt to stop us. An armed motorcade attacked Dr. Perry's house, which is situated on the outskirts of the black community. We shot it out with the Klan and repelled their attack, and the Klan didn't have any more stomach for this type of fight. They stopped raiding our community. After this clash, the same city officials who said the Klan had a constitutional right to organize met in an emergency session and passed a city ordinance banning the Klan from Monroe without a special permit from the police chief. So, again, these people are cowards. They hide behind fucking white pointy masks and irritate people in the middle of the night. But when they're confronted, as the cowards that they are, they run. At the time of our clash with the Klan, only 3 Negro publications, the Afro-American, the Norfolk Journal, and Guide, and Jet Magazine reported the fight. Jet carried some pictures of our self-defense guard. Our fight occurred 2 weeks before the famous clash between the Indians and the Klan. We had driven the Klan out of our country into the Indian territory. The national press played up the Indian-Klan fight because they didn't consider this a great threat. The Indians are a tiny minority, and people could laugh at the incident as a sentimental joke, but no one wanted Negroes to get the impression that this was an accepted way to deal with the Klan. So the white press maintained a complete blackout about the Monroe fight. Very common. So, here's another funny story. He was working to integrate a local pool, and there was a picket line. And after he left this picket line, the cops came up to him and they were like ordering him to surrender his gun. He said he's not surrendering his gun because there's like 4,000 angry ass white people around there. And he's surrounded by these white people who keep screaming at him. And he told them, no, I'm not surrendering my gun. And yeah, he scared the shit out of these people. Somebody in the crowd fired a pistol and the people again started to scream hysterically, kill them, pour gasoline on them, set them on fire. All this time, about 3 policemen had been standing about 50 feet away from us while we kept waiting in the car for them to come and rescue us. Then when they saw that we were armed and the mob couldn't take us, 2 of the policemen started running. One ran straight to me, grabbed me on the shoulder and said, surrender my weapon, surrender your weapon. I struck him in the face and knocked him back away from the car and put my carbine in his face, and I told him we are not going to surrender to a mob. I told him that we did not intend to be lynched. The other policeman who had run around the side from the car started to draw his revolver out of the holster. He was hoping to shoot me in the back. Very typical cop move. They did not know that we had more than one gun. One of the students, who was 17 years old, put a 45 in the policeman's face and told him that if he pulled out his pistol, he would kill him. The policeman started putting his gun back into the holster and backing away from the car, and he fell into the ditch. There is a very old man, out in the crowd, and he kept screaming and crying like a baby, and he kept saying, God damn, what is this goddamn country coming to? That the blacks have got guns, the blacks are arms, and the police can't even arrest them. He kept crying, and somebody led him away through the crowd, where he hopefully keeled over from a coronary. He also had a very good newsletter. It was called The Crusader. Does BRG stand for Big Smoke Red Guard? Wow, never heard that before. So he was driven out of the country, actually. And he took up a very anti-imperialist line. Here's a cartoon here. This was called The Crusader. I don't know why he had a knight. I guess maybe he liked knights. But it was a lot of republishing of stuff that was released in China, revolutionary Cuba, although he was eventually driven out of Cuba because he started criticizing Fidel Castro, and Fidel didn't really like it all that much. Publishing stuff about like what was going on in Vietnam. I'm going to link this because it's very good. Hey, you're catching a stream. That you are. Just don't start talking about rarefied philosophy shit to give me a headache. It is 1:02 in the morning and I'm not in the mood. So I really love these cartoons. There's Bobby Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, and J. Edgar Hoover. We need to start drawing political cartoons again. He's talking about Brown versus Board, all sorts of stuff. He was a very, very prolific writer. Very, very good polemicist as well. Here's a poem. The silent shall inherit the thunder. In Lexington and Bunker Hill rose an angry cry of, to the battlefield. And men who loved freedom more than life and wealth thundered to the world, liberty or death. The flames of freedom swept the land when swiftly rolled the gallant Minuteman, with enemy to the front of him and traitors at his back. All in freedom's cause, the first to die was black. But now, silent is the bugler, and he who beats the drums while tyranny tramples freedom with no gallant call to arms. Oppression falls like darkness over every town and brook, while patriots stand in shadows and tremble as they look. The fascist clouds are gathering, and blood will surely flow where heritage is distorted in the jargon of Jim Crow. Now listen, patriots, and hear what fascist Minutemen call their Paul Revere. A Hitler right named Rockwiller Bush rides with terror to bomb an N-word's church. Black children starve in their ghetto shack for the penalty of being black, while pious-sounding liberals smile and say, violence against violence is immoral today, but listen well, and soon you shall hear a bugler and a drummer who shall nearly bust your ear, a universal cry of freedom from every land, the oppressed of the world marching hand in hand, and in darkest Dixie, where the savage clansmen ride, a black bugler will arouse the countryside. Patriots fired with freedom shall arm from town to town, and from within and from without will mow the races down. An angry cry will rise as in Lexington and Bunker Hill, and blood will mark the trail from Harlem to Mobile. Behold the long silent bugler, a black boy beats the drums. Hear the angry roll of thunder, take up the noble call to arms. So it was stuff like this that inspired Huey to start the Huey and Bobby to start the Black Panther Party for self-defense. They were heavily inspired by Negroes with guns. It was actually required greeting within the party. And they came out of a group called RAM that actually made Robert F. Williams its honorary chairperson, if I recall correctly. That was a very good poem. Yeah, he was elected president of the U.S.-based Revolutionary Action Movement. So yeah, he had his fingers in quite a few pies. The funny thing is that I have a book about him. It's called Radio Free Dixie. He actually had an American flag in his yard, like all the way up until the day he died. He never I guess he saw himself as an armed reformist or something like that. Like he talks about revolution. But he never thoroughly rejected the idea of Americanism. and they talk about that in Radio Free Dixie. He was a Marine veteran. Um, he believed that America could be saved. Apparently, self defense is not a love of violence, it is a love for justice. Oppressive and malicious aggressions show manifestations of love for violence and sadism. Are these so called non-violent forces so overwrought with the sensual pleasure that they derive from the violence of so called non-violence that their emotions obscure the clear cut differences between self defense, aka self preservation, and oppressive aggression? And he constantly refers to black people as Afro Americans. China, new hope of oppressed humanity. So, yeah, very interesting man. Very hardcore man. I would not want to piss him off. Here he is meeting Chairman Mao. And he republished in the Crusader Chairman Mao's Zedong's statement calling upon the people of the world to unite to oppose racial discrimination by U.S. imperialism and support the American Negroes in their struggle against racial discrimination. So, yeah, there's also a very good picture of Chairman Mao, I believe, signing his Red Book. Hallelujah, the meek shall inherit the earth. To Robert Williams by Shou Sheng Ling. Your country is so broad and so vast, yet it doesn't allow your footprints. Beautiful is your native town, but there you may not dwell. What crime have you committed? Only that your skin is black. What law have you broken? Only that you chaired your NAACP branch? The KKK sought you everywhere. The police searched for your trail. Like bats that dread the shining light, they tried to put the sun in jail. You found refuge in Cuba, but your heart was with your 19 million brothers struggling to wrest from Wall Street's hands sacred freedom and equality. Why should the waves of the Mississippi swallow Negro corpses in gunny sacks? Because they were white men's neighbors and ate with them at the same table? Why should flame charred Negro bodies hang from Arkansas telephone poles? Because they rode with whites on a bus or wanted to study in the same school? Robert Williams, I see you standing for a map of your land, thinking, we must have a people's America. We can't let the big shots ride high forever. Robert Williams, look around at the wide world. On the banks of the Yangtze, where the sun is rising, you have 650 million brothers in arms. Surely the day will come where you'll be welcomed back with flowers, where you'll stroll in North Carolina's woods, where you'll again fish on the edge of Old Miss. And black and white shall sit in the same theaters and relax in the same swimming pools and till America's soil together. Surely the day will come. Here he is praising the development of the atomic bomb by the Chinese. Malcolm X also said something similar. I wish he could have had a bigger fucking print. Yeah. Uh, I put a link to it in the chat so you all can read it at your leisure. But a lot of interesting stuff here. But again, you'll go blind reading it. You should take breaks. Last poem. Oh, how ill-gotten her mighty wealth, from whence she dopes and drinks herself to death. Frantically she dances to a sordid tune, swears and curses that age has flown too soon. Oh, what a despicable species of the human race, drunken and lewd, with yet a haughty smirk upon her face, self-proclaimed saint with Bible in her hand. Oh, thanks to her that God is a mighty man. Blasphemous woman, full of vanity and disgrace. How artful the veil that hides her demonic face. Scarlet mother of brutes and spiteful knaves, who ghoulishly consume the blood of paupers and of slaves. Oh, how decadent, and given to a savage rage, gaudily painted, drunken and cleaning to a moribund age, bruteful America painting with death and laughing hysterically, cursing the God she made for his impotence of eternity. This guy would have made it big as a fucking beat poet, but he was a jack of all trades. Anyways, so hopefully you find yourselves educated on how our ancestors fought back, because a common saying in the movement is that we are not our ancestors. And yeah, we are not our ancestors, because our ancestors weren't punks. Like, we're the only ones that do the electric slide dancing with our oppressors, or think that electing this or that person president is going to free us. So take some pages out of your ancestors' books. Read the Crusader. Learn about indigenous American and Maroon guerrilla warfare. Am I saying go out and start one? No, because you'll die. But um, we're not our ancestors because our ancestors realized that in many cases they didn't have anything left to lose. So that's all for tonight. Don't go out and try to start a guerrilla war by yourself. You need other people alongside you. And keep in mind, I'm not encouraging violence. Everything I'm talking about is a big hypothetical. But you cannot vote in socialism.